About a year ago, I was humbled to be invited into a collaboration project with Levy and a handful of other great players, with the idea that we would all take turns in soloing over the changes to the old soul and Motown classic Something You Got by Chris Kenner. I'd highly recommend going back and checking out the full video so you can see everyone else's solos, some really fantastic playing on show. I'll link to that in the description. But in today's lesson, we're going to break down what I played and figure out some easy ways to navigate playing over these kinds of changes. For this video, I'm using my brand new Sunbear Farran-Five signature telecaster pickups, and I'm absolutely thrilled with how these have turned out. And I hope you dig the tone too. I'm also plugged into my Brown Amp's carbon pedal for a very light bit of overdrive, and on the original recording I was plugged into my Lazy J20 amp, but for the lesson here I'm plugging into my 69 Deluxe reverb. Okay, let's get this show on the road. So my opening phrase on this is probably the one that requires the most explanation out of the whole thing. So the way that I'm seeing this is that I come in over a pickup bar just before the band kicks in. And in my mind, a pickup bar would be kind of the equivalent of a turnaround. So imagine we'd done one complete loop of the sequence. At this point, we're thinking about playing over something like the 5 chord that's then going to want to inevitably resolve to the 1 for beat 1 of bar 1 of the progression. So in this case, we're in the key of B flat, the 1 chord being the B flat major. So we could be thinking F7 in our pickup bar, and we can generate lines from the F7 chord. That would give us the 5-1 cadence. But now what I chose to do was not to think of the 5-1 cadence, but to treat it like a 4 minor to 1 kind of cadence, what we call a plagal cadence. I'm going to do a video on that exact subject very soon, looking deep into this because it's one of the most beautiful sounds. So basically in my mind there's no chord being played, but I'm imagining that we're hearing an E flat minor or an E flat minor 6 wanting us and willing us to resolve to the B flat major to kickstart everything. So now it should come as no surprise when we see that the opening phrase is essentially just descending an E flat minor arpeggio, right? You can, of course, as always, it's good to try and visualize your triads for mapping these things out. You might be thinking of this. Root position, second inversion, first inversion, E flat minor triads, and just simply arpeggiate your way down there. And then I play this note, which is just an enclosure to land us on the 5th of the B flat major chord as that chord lands on beat 1 of bar 1. And we're playing this as a run of 16th notes. So we're thinking 1, 2, 3, and a 40 and a 1. As always, very full and thorough lesson materials are available for this at the links in the description. This will include my tab and notation in Guitar Pro and PDF formats with the audio file embedded into Guitar Pro, which makes it truly interactive. It'll also include the chord chart, backing track, and the audio file of my performance. If you want to get hold of all of the lesson materials for every lesson I've ever done, which we're talking over a year's worth of weekly lessons now, you can join my Patreon for just $10 a month. That gives you access to everything, past, present and future. Or if you just want this one lesson in particular, you can use the Gumroad link. Either way, thanks so much for your support. Now we're resting on the B flat major for a while. We're going to play this phrase. So I'm thinking B flat major pentatonic there for the most part. Part of this shape, what we could call the A shape. And also part of what we could call the C shape. Putting in a little bit of a passing note, the minor third down to the 2, which is something you hear me do a lot. I've often spoken about how that's a big part of the country and bluegrass sound. Then we're bouncing back and forth between the root and the 6th. Now the chord that's coming up on the horizon is the F7, the 5 chord. So we play this, which if we think about the intervals we're choosing to play here, we've got the flat 7 and the 13. So we're kind of thinking F13 at that point. But I'm also going to bend this 13 up a semitone to make it the flat 7. Really pretty sounding, very delicate sounding over this F7 chord. And then the exact same kind of idea we just spoke about on the B flat, but this time on the F7. The flat 3 down to the 2 to the 1. That bluegrassy thing again. Liberal use of vibrato. I'd recommend like a slow, wide vibrato for this. And remember, like I've mentioned in a lot of my other videos, it's really key that your vibrato comes from the wrist and not the fingers. Get the fingers nice and angled off to the side, get the thumb hooked over the top slightly, or as far as you can get it, and create kind of a fulcrum there where you can roll the wrist around. Makes it sound way more natural and vocal. We don't want to hear any of that nervous, twitchy sounding finger vibrato. Horrible. Now we're just going to let that note sit with the vibrato on it for an entire bar. The idea being to create a sense of space here and not fill everything up too much. But now we still have 2 bars of F7 left to play through, so we're going to start to ramp up our intensity, create a natural kind of acceleration. The next thing we're going to play is this collection of 3-note voicings for an F7, F dominant sound. Now if we take the top note from that run, we simply have this. What if we want to harmonize that with 2 notes beneath it? Okay, so this is where it's really important to understand the context of the chord you're playing over and understand that the F chord, in this case because it's F7, the scale that would match it would be the F Mixolydian scale. Or, you know, we can just simply be thinking of the parent scale of F7, which would be the B flat major scale, of course. F7 being the 5 of that B flat. So, as long as we harmonize this with notes from that scale, everything will work out nicely. I'm just stacking thirds beneath. So the exception was the 3rd chord, right? If we were truly harmonizing it in thirds, we should have had this G note, making this minor triad along the way. But I like to keep this very much F7. You know, at this point we're still playing over F7, of course, so what we have there are the top 3 notes of this F7 inversion. Flat 7, root, and the 5th. Just makes it sound a little more bespoke to the chord underneath. Pull off, and a little slide. To me that sounds almost like a Hammond organ. I'm a big fan of those sorts of textures. Texture to me is just as important as note choice a lot of the time. Now we continue to ramp up our speed and fill in more space. We play this. So let's have a look at the target notes here. And then we do the same 1 octave higher. So if we see that in the cold light of day with no context, we might think we're playing A minor 7 flat 5, right? That would be an arpeggio. So you can look at it that way, A minor 7 flat 5, but of course we know that if we put F in the bass of that, it becomes an F9 kind of chord, right? So an F7 with a 9 added. So now with that in mind, we can be looking at this in a new light. We can be thinking 3, 5, flat 7 and 9. This is another thing I've spoken about at length in other videos, these 3 to 9 arpeggios as they're known. Giving us the sound of an F9 chord. Now the other thing that I'm adding in there is a little chromatic rundown from the 9 to the root, which is always very easy to find. If you remember that 9 is the same as 2, the root therefore must be a whole tone lower, right? Chromaticism makes it sound a bit jazzy. Same deal with that enclosure at the start. And then we come down the F7 arpeggio, flat 7 and 5th. Now we're looking ahead to the chord that's about to arrive, B flat major again. So we've got to think about resolving this to something from that chord. Just chromatically climb to the major third of your B flat. It's good to try and target those thirds as often as possible. So you got F7 resolving to B flat major. Now a quick word on the timing of that phrase. The pulse to this, you know, the overall tempo is very slow. Talking 80 BPM, something like that. So when we want to put some flourishes of fast notes in there, we can be thinking of 16th notes and 16th note triplets, essentially thinking of like 8th notes and 8th note triplets but in double time. So somewhere in the back of my mind I'm hearing this as the new pulse at that point. I think that's a really fun thing to bring into your phrasing and your playing in general. Create this sense of a malleable time feel. sometimes feeling it at that slower tempo, leaving lots of space, then other times thinking double time to give it a little bit of urgency now and then. To me, one of the players that did that the absolute best was Django Reinhardt. There's always that sense of a fluid time feel in his playing. Makes it so dynamic and exciting. So we're back on the B flat, and our next phrase is a long one with some bluesy elements in. I'll play the full thing kind of slowly and then we'll break it down. So we're back to the B flat major pentatonic within that C shape that we spoke about earlier. Then we move down what really would be like the B flat blues scale, right? So we're mixing our pentatonics. Back to the major. Root note, then this double stop. Very typical, something you've heard me do many times. Thinking of a B flat major triad, minor to major third hammer on while retaining this B string 6th fret. Turn it into something of a trill and then descend the minor pentatonic. And then make it major again. Again, that minor to major third. We've had it a few times already in this one phrase alone. And I like to keep that third ringing while I reach back for the root note on the G string 3rd fret, and then a little tap with the 3rd finger to bring that flat 7 in. There's that dominant 7th first inversion voicing again that we spoke about earlier over the F7. So we're still on this B flat major for a couple of bars, and we're going to use a trick that I used in one of my country studies. Again, lots of double stops. Sounds harder than it is, this stuff. As long as you can visualize your triads, you'll be fine. Here's your B flat major triad. Take the lower 2 notes of that and put in one of these little side steps, and then pick the next 2 notes. Notice how I hybrid pick this stuff as well. I like the tone of that. Plectrum and 2nd finger, and then plectrum and 3rd finger. If I was doing it slow, probably plectrum and 2nd finger for both, but at high speed, it's good to treat that as if you're finger picking and have one finger assigned to each string. It's a bit more efficient. Now these 2 notes are a little fancier. You've still got the 5th, but then you've got the 6th on top, so we're implying the sound of B flat major 6. Then we continue on within the world of B flat major 6. We'll slide into the bottom 2 notes of what appears to be a G minor triad, and that's a nice way to look at it, because the G minor would be the 6th chord in the key of B flat. Therefore, if you play a G minor triad over a B flat major chord, the end result, the byproduct of doing that, is a B flat 6 tonality. Then the top 2 notes of that same triad. So that would be the 6th and the root, and then the root and the 3rd. And then sliding in via a side step into the top 2 notes of this B flat major triad in root position, and then grab the next 2 notes down from that same triad. Now we're going to think B flat 7, because we want to make our way towards the 4 chord, and the B flat 7 would be the 5 of that 4. So to imply B flat 7, what do? We walk down to the flat 7. We couldn't make it any more clear at that point. Then one of my favourite intervals, similar to the one we used earlier over the F7. These intervals of 7ths can sound harsh, they can sound pretty, depends on how you apply them. In this case, I think they sound kind of delicate and pretty. Flat 7 and 13, B flat 13 is the idea there. That's going to then resolve us to the E flat. So just to run up from that double stop country lick. Now we switch to the bridge pickup, get a bit more bite, a bit more twang. We're still thinking B flat 7 at this point, and we play one of my favourite Roy Nichols licks. So the flat 7, the 5th, bending up to the major 3rd and letting it drop down. You might want to be a bit lazy with that bend, not quite go all the way up to the 3rd, make it sound a bit bluesier. Pull off to the root, then down to that 6th again, then back to that B flat note, which now is serving a different purpose, right? That's on beat 1 of the E flat, so that is now the 5th of the chord. First finger full bend there, which is a nice little technique to learn to do. George Harrison was a big fan of that. Check out his solo on Something, the song Something, not being vague, and he does a lot of that. First finger bending. That's where I learned how to do it. Seemed very difficult at first. Felt like, oh, surely he's using low gauge strings or something. As always, it's none of that. It's down to technique. I'm using 10s here, and it's perfectly fine as long as your wrist is doing the heavy lifting, again, and not the fingers. With things like string bends, vibrato, barring, anything that feels physically tough to begin with, you've got to try and remember how you would live your daily life. You know, if someone said, generate some strength for me with your hand, you would never just push with your fingers on something. You'd always get the wrist engaged and squeeze and create a grip. This is how you should be approaching string bends and everything. Not only will it make you feel more in control of what you're playing and your techniques, but it's going to really help with things like fatigue. You know, it might be hard to believe, but I've been playing guitar 30 years now, day in, day out. I literally play guitar all day, every day, and I gig at weekends. And I never once get any aches or pains or any fatigue. And that's because of technique. You know, whereas I see people when they first start out, they're making their fingers do all the heavy lifting. They've got this horrible angle in the wrist, and then they wonder why they're getting carpal tunnel. You know, bad technique is often the root cause of that stuff. And if not the root cause, at best, it's just going to exacerbate the whole thing, right? So get your technique really dialed in. Use that God-given strength that you have by gripping. You know, we have these opposable thumbs. We've got to start using them. I honestly didn't mean for that to sound like a rant or anything. I'm just extremely protective over people's hand health. As someone who's been teaching guitar for such a long time now, day in, day out, seeing people make the same mistakes and create issues for themselves, you know, it's kind of upsetting. Anyway, so that last note that we bent, we were bending a B flat up to a C. And that's perfectly in time for the C7 chord that's just arrived. Just as a side note, within the lesson materials for this, I'm going to include the original chord chart so you can follow the changes along. I also have the chord names labelled above the tab, of course. Now, continuing on to play over the C7, we're going to think of that 3 to 9 arpeggio approach again, like we did on the F7 earlier. So if we think C7, here's your 3 to 9. 3, 5, flat 7, 9. Which again, just to be thorough, is the same thing as a E minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. If we were to see that as the root instead of C. Same thing as C9. And here's the breakdown of what we're doing with that group of notes. Hammer on, climb the shape, return by 1 step, and then bend 18 on the B string, a whole step. So this is coinciding with the return to the B flat major chord, where again we're thinking B flat major pentatonic. So that 5th becomes a 6th in terms of the intervals over the B flat chord. And here's our entire phrase over that B flat. Then the chord goes to F7. We start with the same thing again, but we adapt it. Targeting the major third again, the third of F7. And then a simple little enclosure around the B flat root note. Whole tone above, semitone below, root. And then in for a penny, in for a pound. We're on the Telecaster bridge pickup, so let's go full country here to close out. We're going to play. So we're thinking of a B flat major triad, first inversion. Take the lower 2 notes of that, place them on the 2nd and 3rd fingers, move down a semitone, bend them both a half step to climb them back up that semitone, add the root on top, bring them back down, move chromatically down, and then form the top notes of this B flat major triad here. Now when you're playing this kind of thing, really try and make it as dynamic as possible. Play around with your pick attack, use some rest strokes here and there to really make the notes pop, but also be very delicate at times. You know, really try and be expressive with your playing and your tone. And remember that tone comes from the fingers, not from gear. So the pedal that I'm using, the Brown Amps Carbon, I've got it set with the gain at about 10 o'clock, which means that if I play gently, it stays very clean, right? If I dig in and pick nearer the bridge, we can awaken some of that telecaster twang. You know, we can choose how much of this stuff we want. We can bring it in doses. Now, of course, if you want to get even more twangy, the bridge pickup's always there for you. We got our gear talk out of the way early doors on this one, but I just wanted to mention that if you were interested in these signature pickups of mine, these have been in the works for over a year now, and they sound incredible after many prototypes back and forth. They're very unique. You can read about them at the link in the description. Also, please do make sure that you head over to Adam Levy's channel, hit the subscribe button, and lose yourself down a rabbit hole of incredible guitar lessons. Alright guys, well as always it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining me. Please hit the like button, hit subscribe, all of that stuff, and I'll see you next time. Take care.